I'm Cynthia James, and this network is about changing lives one woman at a time. Welcome to Women Awakening. I am your host, Cynthia James, and I'm very excited to be with you. I get the opportunity to introduce you to women that are inspiring, that inspire me, that are change makers in the world, that are absolute models for what it looks like when you step into the fullness and the greatness of who you come here to be. So I'm thrilled that I get to do this. I do a podcast every week, and you can find us on iHeart and iTunes, and you can find us on Amazon and YouTube, anywhere you can get a podcast. So please subscribe and come back every week and meet these amazing women. So my guest today, Christine Nyanya, and I think I may have screwed up her name, but she's going to say it because we practiced. She is the managing director of Strategia Advisors, a boutique advertising advisory firm serving East African clients. And she's accumulated over 20 years of experience in corporate and project finance, strategy, and economic development advisory work. She is also the founder of kendiart.com, the first online marketplace for contemporary East African art, and an angel investor in the fintech and renewable energy sectors. She has worked in deals advisory at PricewaterhouseCoopers, Kenya, where she managed M&A, capital raising, public-private partnerships, valuation, and due diligence assignments. She served as assistant vice president at the New York City Economic Development Corporation. She is an Eisenhower Fellow, and she currently chairs the board of Sanlam General Insurance Kenya Limited and has served on the boards of Revolution Analytics, Strauss Energy, and Carolina for Kiberia. Well, Christine, welcome. I am so happy you're here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Well, and you are my first African guest. And so I'm thrilled that you're here. And I really want to talk about you. I want to talk about the work that you're doing. But could you tell us a little bit about where you come from, where you were born, what your family life was like?
Sure. So again, I'll repeat my last name, Nganga. That's how it sounds. And just for your guests, to know. But in terms of background, I was born in Nairobi, Kenya. I was born in 1975 in the city of Nairobi. I'm the fourth and last child of David and Grace Nganga. And all my siblings are women. So we are 4 women. And yes, I grew up in a fairly ordinary, I would say, middle-class family. Both my parents were in teaching. And at some point, my dad stopped working because he fell ill. So it was long-term. Unfortunately, my dad ended up having paranoid schizophrenia. So that made life change a little. And my mom decided to pivot out of education also down the road and went back to school and went into the hotelier business and ended up being a businesswoman running various restaurants and cafeterias around Nairobi. And that, I think, is where I got my bug to sort of get into business and want to engage in that space. So I grew up in Kenya, went to primary school, what we call secondary school, high school here. And at the end of my high school at age 17, 18, I ended up getting a scholarship to go and study my undergraduate in Canada in a small town called Peterborough, just outside northeast of Toronto. And that's where I did my undergraduate degree in economics and political science.
Yeah.
And then I worked there for a number of years. My plan initially was to come right back to Kenya right after school, but I ended up staying a little longer because just around that time, it was the early to mid not 2000, sorry, 90s. There was the economy, the African continent, the economy was a bit of a mess. We were in the middle of what were called structural adjustment policies that really devastated a lot of economies on the continent. And so I remember everyone telling me, go back to school, stay in school for a while. If you come here, you won't find work at this time. And that's what led me to stay in Kenya, in Canada for a little while. And then after that, I actually, after a few years, in 2004, I moved to the US to do my graduate school, where I pursued a degree in a master's in public administration with a focus in policy and finance. And I did that in New York, which is where I stayed until 2010, and then decided to move back to Kenya.
Wow. Well, quite a journey for you. And I want to say, first of all, bless your dad having 5 women in the house with a lot of energy.
Right.
You know, and
right.
then and I want to tell you, there is someone very dear in my family who has schizophrenia, and it is quite a challenging thing. And so I guess I want to know from you personally, how did you manage the energy? Because you were aware of what was going on, and you were aware of the pivot that your mother was taking. What were you doing internally to manage it?
I think in the early days, well, actually, I wasn't aware of my dad's diagnosis for a few years. I think the culture generally has been to sort of try and shield kids from some of those realities, at least at that time, and to some extent even now, because I think in Kenya still, until very recently, there's been a major stigma around mental health issues. So for the most part, my mom tried to shield us. There were times my dad didn't live with us. We often have, those of us in the city, we also sort of have a rural home, and sometimes my dad would be there for the most part when I was younger. So you had some limited interactions at certain points. It's when I was probably around 7 or 8 years old when he was back with us sort of on a more full-time basis, and then you would engage with that. So I would say in those first years for my mother, the coping strategy was really to just be the single parent taking care of everything, making sure her daughters became fairly self-sufficient. Our home was very democratic. I remember everyone had chores, everyone had their responsibilities from when I was fairly young. And on Saturdays, we'd have, at some point, we had a short meeting where everyone ironed out their issues with everybody else. So you sat down and said, I didn't like what you did here, and I don't think this is fair to me. And everything would be settled on Saturday. And then the cycle would start again on Sunday. So I think what that did for us really was make us fairly independent, fairly vocal about things going on. And really, in certain ways, we grew up fast, right? We grew up fast. I think getting to know more about my dad, I mean, I didn't know the diagnosis even when he moved back. And that was a challenge for me. But at the same time, my dad was also this incredible person who was a very thoughtful person, actually a lot more introspective, a lot more in tune with his inner self. And I think in a way was the person who made me a lot of aware of that aspect a lot more. I mean, he always, it was clear to me some of what his priorities were very early. Like he always wanted to make sure one was a deep thinker, one was open to other perspectives of other people. Even when I was very young, our discussions were as equals. And then he cared a lot about family. He cared a lot about the environment, but he felt that a big part of our journey is really to learn from each other, different cultures, different perspectives. And that I would say is, I probably of all my siblings had that engagement a lot more with my father. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Well, it's beautiful. My family member that has it is very thoughtful too, and very, very loving, and quite communicative. So I love that you have that. I want to talk about the fact that you chose a field that is highly masculine.
Yeah.
And so I did a podcast recently with someone who was in finance in New York. And so we talked about a little bit of how you navigate being independent, brilliant woman in a field that's male dominated, and still hold your energy and bring your gifts and get respect. And so how'd you navigate that?
I think that had a lot to do with, well, the first stage, I have to say, in Kenya, within the school system, if the distinction between gender, and I know that doesn't seem to be what we hear in the normal media, but once you're in the classroom, if you perform, there's really not much of a distinction. So it's not something that you think of a lot, that the fact that you're a woman doing these courses that are more, getting into math and some of the sciences. First of all, our system makes it quite compulsory to carry on that, a good chunk of it, all the way to the end of high school. So everyone has to take it all the way. But for me to get into finance and continue with economics, I found that I had an intuition into it. I had a natural affinity towards economics specifically. Right from high school, I remember I was taking business courses, and my teachers would always say, your questions are usually less about business and more about the economy. You should consider looking into this. Anyway, fast forward into my working in New York and being in that space, I found that I think what was helpful to some extent is that I went back to graduate school after I'd worked a few years, and therefore I had a lot more confidence in myself. And I was very clear about what I wanted to achieve. Now, I found that being very grounded from a knowledge perspective, so reading a lot, knowing what you're talking about, was a big part of why I could be able to navigate the space. I was able to define a space where I was a subject matter expert. I was very clear about the kind of quality of work that I delivered on. And I think that helped me gain respect amongst my peers, from my bosses and my direct reports. I mean, I think also it's very important to also have the buy-in of those that report to you. And so that was one way. But I have to say that fight is tough. There are many times you still do notice you get sidelined, and sometimes it wasn't a gender issue. Sometimes it was also probably a racial issue, at least when I was in the US. In Kenya, I can't say that because practically everyone is Black, right? But so there you learn what battles to fight, and then you also hope that there are people amongst those that believe in what you do that can be your sponsors, that can be your mentors, and that will fight some battles, behind closed doors for you. I find finding those kinds of allies was key, but a good chunk of it is really developing the tools and the skills that you require to really have confidence in your abilities and what you can deliver.
Yeah, I love that. And and I think that goes across the board. It's like really having confidence in yourself, and being clear about what you want, how you want to deliver it, So what would you say is the greatest challenge you've had, navigating this life you created? Because, when we first met, we were on a call and you were naming all of these things that you were doing. And I was like, well, do you sleep? And so we laughed, because I'm kind of the same kind of person. It's like, I got a lot of balls that I'm juggling, but what's been the greatest challenge for you in navigating this thing called life?
I think even as I say and come across as this confident person, I think it's always that reinforcement sometimes in knowing that you can take on the next challenge and all that. I think well, I don't know if that's my greatest challenge, but it's one of the constant challenges of always when you walk into a new space, being able to believe in yourself that you can, you can figure it out and that it's just a matter of time. Sometimes that's it. I think another area, now on a more personal one, has been because of doing many things, traveling a lot, has also been relationships, long-term relationships. So I'm in my 40s. I date, but I'm not married. I don't have children, and I'm not saying that is necessarily has been my top priority. It's been, in and out, ebb and flowed in my life, but I think that has been a challenge sometimes because you're moving around and it's hard to sustain long distance relationships. Sometimes because some of the work you do ends up being threatening to some people that you're with. And so that, I think, has been a part, a challenge. But at the same time, I also look at it as sometimes you have a different priority at a particular time, and you have to give that get through that, and when that is the key priority, what will come will come.
Yeah, well, and I love that you're talking about that because, I really believe that this is a time on the planet of women emerging. I really think that there's something powerful that is going on with our identities, with our gifts, with our brilliance, coming forward. And the balancing act of, okay, education, career, travel, passions, and then relationships, is an interesting kind of dynamic. And the other part is, I've interviewed a lot of women who've said it's been difficult to find men that are so secure within themselves that they can stand with you as you are, as powerful and dynamic, as they are. And so
Right.
It's an interesting thing that's going on. But what I love is that there are women like you who are so clear about who you are, and that the time and the space will occur the way it will occur for you. Because I'm looking at you. You're beautiful, you're smart, you're accomplished, I mean, it's going to take somebody powerful to stand with you, because you're not going to be a shrinking violet, which I love.
No, I'm not, that for sure. My friends can attest to that. Yeah, no, I'm comfortable with that. It's something, absolutely. I think it's world over. It's something I think that at some point you think it's maybe you, but I'm very comfortable, and I have to say I've been very fortunate to also have grown up in a family that is very comfortable with that, like in the extended family. I mean, I think of now, my dad aside, if I think of my uncles, for example, who would be other, male figures in my life, have generally been very supportive of their wives, and their wives are at par, and they've been high achievers. I have to say, quite a few of them, and so it's I know it exists, right?
Yes.
That there are men out there that do support strong, powerful women, and I'm not one to want to settle for less, because I think then that would affect who I am, and inherently, and I would not be myself.
Okay, ladies, I hope you heard that. Do not settle for less. I just want to make sure that didn't go over your head. So I want to talk about your passion for art.
Right.
Yeah, because before we started recording, I mean, your face lit up when you talked about that. So talk to me about
Oh, really? So it's so interesting because this is something that 5 years ago, I wouldn't have said this would be me or all, but it was sort of a confluence of things that are important to me. So, well, aside from the education background I actually also did a diploma in technology and in the e-commerce time in the .com period, I guess, in early 2000s. And it's an area that is also of interest to me. And I kept feeling that I had not used that talent enough. So what happened is, well, I guess I should have started with the art part. It was just a confluence of several things. I moved back to Kenya, and as I said, in 2010. And in around 2012, I happened to go visit some artists in some studio. I felt that, I hadn't seen some good art in a while. And I think New York had spoiled me. It was always in your face. And so I decided to go and visit a couple of artists in their studios and just have a chat and see what work they had. And I just felt such, my spirit really, was lifted. Once I started engaging with them, seeing their work, there was amazing talent that was only known within a certain niche community, very small community. They speak to themselves. And I kept wondering, after I bought 1-2 pieces, you'd have these artists call you back and they're like, do you want another piece? You're like, I'll get one when I can. And if I see something that I like. But I found why they'd come back to you in that way is because they really didn't have much of a market and so they came back to the people that bought previous work and were a little aggressive in trying to sell. And I tried to then understand the situation. Now, this is me putting on my economics hat. I wanted to understand the market failures, what's wrong in the value chain of the arts in Kenya. But I had not learned, I had not, for one, studied art ever. I could not draw anything to save my life. But I really appreciated artwork. So I decided to take on a project to develop an online platform and try and showcase some of the artwork and see whether people would reach out and purchase, market it internationally and locally. As I also used it as a proof of concept in terms of what is possible, but also to help me sort of understand really what those market failures are. Once you're engaged in the market, you're actually a part of it, then you have the data telling you this is what's going on and this is what's not working. And then you also develop the credibility within the sector to talk to artists, but also to engage with government, which is something I was keen to do. And to that end, I actually was involved in drafting the culture policy for the country a few years ago. So that is how I started what's called kendiart.com. So KENDIART.com. And essentially, initially it was this big, we had hundreds and hundreds of art pieces, but I realized it was very hard to coordinate with artists who don't always understand markets that well. And I realized, that was my first lesson. That wouldn't work. That model wouldn't work. And so we pared down and had fewer artists. We work with over 100 artists, but online, when you go on the platform, you probably will not see more than 30 or 40. So we work from like up and coming artists, students who are still in university. We work with part-time artists. They could be graphic artists by day, but they paint and sculpt at night. We work with some fairly established artists. But they're not only in Kenya. We work with artists from Sudan, Uganda, Tanzania, Burundi and Rwanda, not so much. We've had a couple, but sustainably, at least about 5 countries are involved. That's because Kenya is sort of the hub and probably has the largest art market in the region, even though it's quite underdeveloped. And so my purpose for doing this was really a confluence of many interests of mine. One, the economic development aspect of it. Two, I still enjoy tinkering with technology, even though I think most of my skills are almost obsolete. And three, it was my love for art, which I discovered, in my days in New York.
Oh, Christine. Well, I love that you did that. And I love that you brought your skills together. I mean, one of the things I hope that you ladies are listening to is that you can have different passions and interests, and there are ways to bring them together to create, because we live in an innovative and creative time on this planet. So I'm in awe of everything that you do. And I ask the same last question of every guest. And the question is, if this is Women Awakening, what is the one thing you want women to know about the importance of their waking up?
One thing? Can I say many things that all form one? It's hard to boil it down to one. Okay, if I really had to try and encapsulate it in one, I would say live an intentional life. That's it. But if you let me expound real quickly,
Go ahead.
I think it's because women, we're worthy, and I'm one of those. I talk a lot, but I think it's an intentional life, an examined life, and I think to know that life is short. Lean into your passions. Your priorities can change over time, whether it's family, work, or your passions, and it's okay for things to change. It's important to be brave and to push yourself. I think we sometimes second guess ourselves a lot, and I think that's something we need to trust our instincts a bit more. And finally, as part of that, I'd say, I think it's good for women to know that we have all the tools that we require to realize our life goals. They're all in us. Maybe some are underdeveloped than others. And we really just need to tap into that and develop where we need to develop, but really all the tools already exist in us.
That is beautiful. Well, Christine, I am so happy to know you, to connect with you, to interview you, to hear what you're doing. And I'm really grateful that you came in and be on the show with me.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. I appreciate this opportunity. And I look forward to engaging with you in many other ways. Thank you.
Me too. So ladies, I hope you will come back every week. Christine is an example of what women are doing all over this planet. I want to remind you that you're powerful. I want to remind you that you're dynamic. I want to remind you that you're original, not another one like you on this planet. I want to remind you that, just like she said, you have everything within you that you need to create the life you want to live. So be bold, be brave, be courageous, step up and step out. Come back and meet my guests every week and know that I'm so excited for you. I'm so excited that you're on the planet, because the world is waiting for your gifts. Many blessings, and I'll see you next time.